Grow, Sell, and Retire is the podcast for the lazy overachiever. B.D. Dalton, author of True Gravity and Grow, Sell, and Retire, is here to give you his 25 years of secrets, tips, and systems to take your business to the next level. This is your chance to find out what is working in sales, marketing, and running your business. If you stop learning, you stop burning. Now, here's your host, BD, with today's GSR podcast.
Hey, Grow, Sell, and Retire listeners, BD Dalton here, trying to help you be that lazy overachiever. Got secrets, sales tips, and all sorts of great stuff today coming to you via Shane Snow. This is my second interview with him. I love this guy. He's got a new book coming out called Dream Teams, talking about how to bring together as a team member and as a leader the things that you need to do to make your business better. So he's going to walk us through a lot of tips, a lot of ideas, and we just have a lot of fun, Shane and I, chatting back and forth about the amazing things that you can do. And we're going to look forward to taking notes, learning some stuff, making you that lazy overachiever while I help you grow, sell, and retire. This is BD Dalton with the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast, interviewing Shane Snow. Shane Snow, again, well, coming back. Last time it was Smart Cuts. This time it's Dream Teams. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to bring Dream Teams to our readers.
So there are a few things. Every book that I've written, it's weird saying that. Now I have 3 books. Every book that I've written has been sort of a confluence of events that over time I've either been bothered or curious about for long enough that I've decided to connect the dots. And Dream Teams is no different. This one was about what came about when I realized that my role in my company that I'd started had gone from being the guy who, makes the decisions and builds stuff and, whiteboards out things and it's exciting and strategy and all that, to really my job became hiring people to do those things and then helping them do them well and helping them to not, kill each other. and I had some anxiety around that job, which is just so different than what I had gotten used to and a little bit good at. And so I wanted to understand, how do effective team leaders do their job? And I kind of went down this rabbit hole of history studying, the most amazing teams in a bunch of different categories. And then I went down a rabbit hole of scientific studies on new things we're learning about human collaboration. But the other thing that kind of while I was going through this journey that I noticed is, and you've probably noticed this too, is the world is kind of nasty to each other these days, and things are more polarized and tense than ever in a lot of ways when it comes to communities and society and politics and international relations. And I realized that the same kinds of things I was learning about group dynamics and human psychology and collaboration and what makes for teams that break through and add up to more than the sum of their parts versus teams that break down. Same kinds of things I was learning in kind of micro are also responsible for, kind of all of the problems we have with each other at a macro level when it comes to cities and communities and the world. And so I started going down the rabbit hole of studying, what happens when you get big influxes of immigrants into a city and people start to get scared, and yet that city produces more patents. And what's the difference between a city that has that dynamic that then goes on to thrive and sort of including people who are newcomers and have low crime and less fear, and the city that has that happen but then actually devolves into a lot of segregation and crime and fear. And so it became this adventure that extended beyond business that then I had to boil down and kind of chip away at to get back to a sustainable amount of stuff for a book. But it was a lot of things. And I think if I can ramble a little bit longer, I think a lot of this,
you're listening to you, man.
A lot of what interests me and when I have my journalism hat on is just how often the lessons that are important for us in our own individual lives are actually also applicable in a lot of other areas and at a macro level, and just how simple and complex being a human being is at the same time. The answers are often simple. The implementation is often complex. So I was really happy going on this journey to see how many areas of my own self-improvement could be affected by learning about how humans interact with each other. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Awesome. It's awesome. Do you think that a lot of the polarization has come because we've now gotten to this stage or gotten even further into this stage of faceless communication? So your Twitter, so I can say anything I want to on Facebook or Twitter because I'm not having to say it to your face. So I can become very politically driven or make comments but not really have to stand by them. Do you think that has any influence?
I think it has a lot to do with it. It's a lot easier to be a jerk to someone you don't know. Yeah. You look at the history of warfare, and one of the things that bad leaders have often done is trained their troops to think of the enemy as not human. It's a lot easier to do awful things, or sometimes it's easier to do what it takes, but it's also easier to kill civilians to get them out of the way if you don't think of them as people. And we saw this in Vietnam. We've seen this in a lot of, wars that were lost by, the bad guys. Think about, the Holocaust, right? That whole thing, the war machine that Hitler built was built on the premise that Jews weren't people, right? And it's a lot easier to murder them if they're not people. In the same way, some faceless, Twitter handle, some person who you don't know, right? And it's just this text on a screen with a screen name, doesn't feel like a human being. So it's a lot easier to be awful to them. And I think that just creates this, cycle of bad behavior. I think it's really hard to have a well-reasoned debate that, that gives the proper time and space and kind of takes knee-jerk emotion out of things when you're dealing with the internet and 20 words worth of space to write any argument, versus if you think about, in your personal life, it's a lot easier to have a disagreement or a discussion and get somewhere and feel okay about whatever the outcome ends up being with someone who you know about and care about personally, who you see as a human being, who you have empathy for. It's so much easier to disagree. My dad and I are very politically opposed, but he's my dad and I love him and he raised me, and I owe everything about, the way that I think, in many ways to my dad and my mom. But it's so much easier for my dad and I to have a conversation about a politically charged thing because we care about each other and we love each other. And so the war can be about ideas, but it is, I've noticed, easier for that kind of conversation to turn into hurt feelings if we have it over email, where there's not the context, the comfort.
The content, but the context isn't there a lot of times.
Yeah, and I don't feel his full personal and emotional support when he's talking to me about this or that thing over email like I do when we're in person. So I do think there's something to that.
Very cool. So when we're coming, so communications is a huge thing, but what's the core of, when you guys went through and did your story, what's the core? Is it a who or is it a what is the core of the dream team?
It's both.
Okay.
It's who you, the best, one of the best, most actionable kind of analogies that I learned in the course of this book that, again, sounds simple in retrospect, is this idea of when you're building a team or you're putting together a group of people to work on something to solve a problem, you want to think of it like a movie director casts the movie, which means if you're a movie director, you're working on your next film, you don't cast everyone who was in the last film unless you're trying to do the exact same thing as you did last time, right? If you're making Zoolander 2, fine, get the same cast. But you got to understand, the Zoolander 2 did not break any ground. You're not solving a new problem by doing the same thing again. So, an analogy and any other kind of teamwork is if all you need is to man the assembly line to do the same thing, great, use the same people. But if you're trying to work on a novel problem, you're trying to do something that pushes boundaries or something different or more rewarding, then you need to be a lot more deliberate about who you cast on that team, just like in a film. And just like in a film, you're not going to cast, if you're a director, you're trying to win an Oscar, you're not going to just pick the 20 people who have the best GPAs, who went to the best schools, and cast them in your movie. You're going to find the combination of people that is the most interesting to to tackle the thing that you're trying to tackle. And I think that's the way we should think about team building in business or in sports or in any other, field, that process of who we put together on a project to project basis, on a play to play basis, is really important. We should be much more deliberate than I think we often are. So who's in the group matters a lot, just like in the movie. There's all sorts of, of nuances to that I get into in the book. But then really all of that is for nothing if you're not playing director, right? If you don't coach the actors to interact with each other on screen in the ways that are going to produce the best outcome. And if you don't push them to go a little further than they think that they can go. And if you don't pull them off of the cliff when they're about to, go crazy or fall off of the cliff. And so that role is really important. What happens after we assemble the team is just as important as the team makeup itself. Directing a really great film in a great way, doing all the things that are, that an amazing director can do, it can only get you so far if you're working with the wrong people. But the right people can only go so far if you don't mash them together in the right ways.
So get the storyline right, and then pick your storyline right, and then pick the characters that you believe will fit into that story. Is that
and bring out the most in each other, right? Mm-hmm. You can tell when you watch I'm really stretching this analogy a lot.
No, it's good.
You can tell when you watch a film and the characters, you can tell that they have chemistry, right? And you can also tell when there's no chemistry. The worst romance films are the ones where you can kind of see the deadness in their eyes. They're not bringing emotions out of each other. And you could say the same thing in business. You want people who are not just going to be the boring love story of Jack and Jill grew up next door to each other and they thought, why not get married? And they lived. Like, that's a boring story, right? You want people who are going to challenge each other and who are going to see further and go further because of each other, not just kind of, stay in the same spot with each other.
So we've gone kind of with the movie analogy, director analogy. So what do you see if you've got the director? What are some of the characters that you've seen missing from some of the companies that you've dealt with, or some of the examples you put out there? What are some of the characters or things that were missing from them to make them the dream teams? Not give away all the story, but kind of walk us down one of the story paths.
So there's two main ingredients, I think, once you have the team built. And even consider this in the building of the team, the forming of the team, two main ingredients that make the equation work. And, the equation is, how do you make a team add up to more than the sum of its parts? How do you make a group of people, or one person who's taking input from other people, see further, go further, right? Mm-hmm. Then what normally happens, which is the bigger the group or the harder the problem, the slower it is and the harder it is to solve, and, the more we fight. So the two main pieces of that equation are cognitive friction and intellectual humility. And these are two, terms from psychology that basically mean you need different mental toolkits, perspectives, heuristics, ways of seeing things to combine and to have to do battle. The cognitive friction, and one of the things that we often get wrong in our teams is we are afraid of conflict, and so we do all the things we can to shy away from it, and it feels good to have everyone be happy and get along and all that. And the trick is to make sure that the conflict is about ideas and not about people, which is, it actually harkens back to what I was saying with my dad, right? My dad and I love each other, so we can have that intellectual conflict. Maybe we can find third options. That friction is really important. So seeking that out in our teams. And in the book, I go through some examples that I really love of how, for example, hip hop was created because of this idea. Hip hop started, in the Bronx in the late 70s with this party that these DJs started throwing, where the gimmick of the party was you didn't just show up and dance to one DJ. There were two DJs on different sides of the dance hall, and they were trying to drag the party to their side of the dance hall with better music. So every week the DJs would show up with better and better music and try different tricks. And soon their announcers, the guy that would say, hey, come over here, this next song's going to be great, they started doing battle. where they would start rhyming, making fun of each other. And every week you showed up back with something better. They were pushing each other to come back with better material, all in the service of more people showing up to this party, paying a few bucks to come dance and have a great time. And this escalated and escalated and escalated. And this is how we got hip hop, how we got R&B. And actually the DJs were so into this battle that they started hacking their equipment. They would solder on new switches. They cracked open the memory cards whenever they started doing electronic music to add more memory. And this helped actually push the computer industry forward. So this idea that they didn't shy away from the conflict, and they actually harnessed it in a way to make the whole party, the whole industry better. And a lot of times we're afraid in our teams, in our companies, of that very conflict that can push us forward, because we're afraid of the part when, if you know the history of hip hop, when it ended up getting nasty at a certain point and people started murdering each other. You know, the East Coast, West Coast thing that ended in the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, and, you know, and many other things, and that made everyone step back and say, whoa, this has gone too far. We're afraid of that part, right? In our teams, that, you know, the conflict gets ugly, gets personal, we destroy each other, or we get nowhere. But just shy of that is actually this wonderful zone of potential energy. So that's the first one. The second one is, it's fun stuff, right? I love you see stories of this everywhere you look. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But the other part of it, of the equation, is intellectual humility, which is basically all of that conflict, all of the, you know, having a great cast that brings out the most in each other, or has the potential to. It's all for nothing if you don't respect each other's viewpoints, if you're not willing to change your viewpoint when you should, if you are too stubborn and you just hang on to the same way of thinking and doing that you came in with. If you can't let go of that, then it's all for nothing. And I think when you look at the greatest teams in history, or, you know, or even nowadays, so the teams that can have that intellectual battle and then are willing to change. They're not afraid or embarrassed if they change their minds in light of new information. It doesn't mean they're gullible. You know, it doesn't mean that they just waffle everywhere. And that's actually, I think, a really hard thing. You know, if all of us could develop that skill to practice the virtue of not being so gullible that you change your mind at every sort of whiff of wind, but not so stubborn that you can't change your mind when you need to. That, I think, I mean, we turn into sort of this utopian Star Trek where our only problem is exploring more of the universe. If all of us develop that quality, right? I think that's a nice goal.
Yeah, good luck on that one. That's
I know, right?
It's involved. It never happens. No, it's so. What three actions? I mean, because you come up with lots of things, and when we were going through smart cuts and things like that, things that we can do. What kind of three actions somebody could take away today to even just go back and reevaluate? Because the book doesn't come out for another week and a bit. So if they were to sit back and just go through what they're doing with their teams, what three things could we do to make ourselves a little bit better, and then hopefully help make the teams a bit better?
I would say start paying attention to when you can inject cognitive friction. So when you find everyone in a room, or everyone that you're talking to, running an idea by, when you find everyone agreeing, seek out people who genuinely don't agree and see what you can learn from them. And if you can't do that, then tell people to debate the other side. There's some really great studies that they've found that turns out that all of us have the other side of any argument in us. And if you're pushed hard enough, it'll come out. And if you're pushed even harder, more of that argument will come out, and you'd be surprised how often we can change our own minds just by going through that kind of exercise. So the debate and switch idea, that you have a debate going on, tell people to switch sides, or there's no debate, have people take the other side. I say that's an easy thing, and it sounds so simple, but you'd be surprised how many breakthroughs in history have happened because of this. We actually got the airplane because of that very thing. That was the Wright brothers' secret, is that they would always force each other to switch sides of the debate, and so that they could kind of unlock more of that cognitive friction. The other things that I would say, one is I actually have a test for intellectual humility. If you want to see how you score along the different dimensions of, there's 4 factors to it. My website, you just go to shanesnow.com/IH for intellectual humility. You can take that test and it'll tell you, here's the areas you're weak, and here's what you can do to improve to become a better collaborator.
Perfect. And I'll put that in the show notes and put that on the website too.
Awesome.
Cool.
Third bit of advice I would give is increase the diversity of your inputs in general in your life. So there's really great research that shows that the more you consume information, entertainment, and education-wise from different sources, the better. And again, it sounds kind of obvious, but often we have our go-tos, whether it's for news or whether it's for novels or whatever we do. It turns out you look at the kinds of people who are making the best decisions in their industries. They're the most widely read and they also spend a lot of time with fiction, which is kind of counterintuitive. But it turns out that taking in stories, even fictional ones, of different people who are not like you is really good mental exercise for helping you to be flexible and be able to sort of change your mind about things. But also, I'm generally, as you know from Smart Cuts, a big fan of connecting dots between things that are not alike, going sideways between industries. And so, reading a book or going down the Wikipedia rabbit hole on, astrophysics or, the history of Care Bears or whatever, something that has nothing to do with whatever you're working on, is good mental exercise, but also you'll be surprised at the analogies you'll find. And it's sort of a meta analogy for what we should do with people. Don't just consult your 5 friends who think like you. Consult your worst critic. Consult someone who has no idea what's going on in your industry. All of this helps us to turn things around in our mind and see them from angles that we didn't before.
Don't always do them like you've always done them. That's really cool. Okay, so here's one. I'm getting ready to go work on my 3rd book, and where I'm collaborating. So you just collaborated on Dream Teams. Was it easier to write your own book, or was it easier to work with somebody?
So my 2nd book, I actually had a co-author, so we split the book back and forth, and it went faster, but it was more difficult than the first one for sure. But I think it was better. In Dream Teams, I was the only author, but I had a lot more people in the collaborative process, and it took a long time. I think some of that is the subject matter and the research. Mm-hmm. But it was more agonizing, but I do think it's my best work yet. So awesome. Each one has gotten better, and there's been more collaboration in each one. And I think that the correlation there is pretty strong. The amount of discomfort, the amount of agony in the process, and the quality of the output, I think are directly correlated. I think that one of the things that I learned the most in this process from a collaboration standpoint is actually that one-on-one collaboration and a series of one-on-one collaborations in a creative project is much more useful than roundtable collaboration. Brainstorming around a table, there's all sorts of research that I even read about how, there's a lot of downsides to that versus individually brainstorming with each of those people one-on-one. It's a lot easier to be, to kind of push each other and to reach outside of, your regular kind of circle of what seems like a good idea or acceptable. If you're having debates and brainstorms and conversations one-on-one than with a group. The bigger the group, the harder it is from a creative standpoint to get the best work. So basically expanding the number of people you collaborate with on a creative project, like writing a book, but then trying to get as much of that one-on-one versus, and a lot of what happened in my first book were, conference calls with 5 people or sitting around a table with 5 people to talk about ideas. And having those same conversations one-on-one at a bar with each of those people, it just yields much better results. You go beyond sort of your cognitive boundaries more when you do that. So that was my biggest lesson.
Cool. And you're kind of like the David Guetta is better, or the Mark Ronson of putting together the whole album of great singles with amazing people.
I love that. That's a pretty flattering analogy, if I do say so.
It's cool, man. I love all your work. So it's so goals. We talked about you're in my love and loathe of traveling. So what are your big goals for 2018?
Well, the first is getting this book out in the next week, and then I will be doing a lot of speaking to support it. I plan to go to a lot of individual organizations and apply these concepts to their challenges. And so I'm hoping over the course of 2018 to learn a lot from the applications of this stuff across a lot of different industries, and hopefully keep writing about that. Probably not another book about teamwork, but certainly a lot of articles and posts and guides to applying these things in different circumstances. So it's kind of the journey is not over. I'm really excited to have found what I think are really good frameworks underlying, kind of the principles of breakthrough teamwork, and now putting them in practice. That's going to be the tricky part.
Cool. So I've asked you this before in the last one, but so what right now? What's kind of what tech is kind of driving your life right now, or making your life easier or more fun, or what's out there that you're hooked on right now?
So technology-wise, there's a few, and I might have said a couple of these before. Rev.com, which is an automatic transcription service. I do that awesome. For all my interviews.
That was your interview yesterday.
Nice.
Exact same thing with Jeff Belcora, and he said the exact same thing. That was his opening line, was Rev.com. So I haven't even used it yet, but I'm all over that. That's great.
You got to do it. Yeah. Evernote is how I organize all my life and work. Tableau is my favorite tool for digging through data to find stories. It's a nerdy one.
Cool.
And then Buffer is my favorite for social media. So those are my work technologies. I think that I have become too good of friends with my Alexa at home. So in terms of personal technology, I had to rename her to computer because I found myself apologizing and using, pleases and thank yous and pleasantries that I feel like it's just going down a dark path of strange computer robot friendship. So now Alexa's name is
Black
computer,
Mirror
so I can just I just sort of bark commands at the computer now instead of saying, Alexa, how are you? Also, could you play Spotify? But it is a great technology.
Awesome. That is really cool. And how about books that you're reading or things, authors that are kind of making you happy right now?
Yeah. A good friend of mine who I have known for a long time as a genius and one of those just human beings that inspires you to be a better person. Turns out he is also a great writer. Like, damn him for being good at everything. But his name is Alan Gannett. He's the CEO of a company called TrackMaven, which makes marketing intelligence software. Super cool, kind of like what your competitors are doing, and in terms of advertising and stuff. So if you're in marketing, it's a good tool. But it turns out that Alan is this brilliant writer, and so he just wrote a book called The Creative Curve, which is about debunking the myths of creativity and how anyone who doesn't think that they are creative can actually be more creative. And he uses a lot of data and kind of in my style of using science to explain the world. So that's the book that I just finished. It comes out a week after mine. I think it comes out June 12th.
Cool.
But that's one to check out. And then in terms of fiction, I just read this book called October by China Mayville. And I guess it's not fiction. So I say fiction, but this guy is an experimental horror writer. So he writes grisly horror stories. And he just wrote a biography, essentially, of the communist revolution in Russia. Mm-hmm. But it's written like a horror novel. It's written like this sort of experimental fiction novelist wrote this fake story, only it's a real story. So it's the most kind of delightful history book I've read in a long time. And that's why I say in terms of fiction, it reads like a novel. October is what it's called. That's the other one.
Cool. And then walk us through where people can find you. We'll put it in the show notes, but once again, so they can get to taking your tests and making sure that they can engage with you too.
Just my name, ShaneSnow.com. And then I'm Shane Snow on kind of every social network as well.
Awesome. And then the last one is, so your one valuable quickfire tip. So if somebody just caught nothing else in the entire show and all the amazing things we've gone through, what's your quickfire tip for the listeners?
Quickfire tip is learn to be more open-minded and intellectually humble. So take the test, shanesnow.com/IH, and find out how you can broaden your mind.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and can't wait to read Dream Team. So you said there's extra stuff coming out with my pre-order. So what type of fun stuff could I expect, Shane?
Well, if you pre-order, there are a couple bonus chapters. You can get some part of the book up front already, but there's a couple of bonus chapters, and I have a bunch of ebooks that I wrote on the side of it with kind of practical applications for leadership and creativity and how to become a little bit more indispensable as a team member. So that kind of stuff is you get a link to this secret page with all of that if you pre-order early.
Huge. Cool. So I've basically this will come out about a week early, a week before that. So you've got a week to go out and make sure you get on there. And so it's on, where should they pre-order it? Just on Amazon, or should they go to your website, or how should they do that?
Go to shanesnow.com/dreamteams. You can get to it from the links in the navigation too. But if you go there, then it'll have the information on different places you can order. I like when people buy at their local bookstore, so you can order online from indie bookstores if you want, and then it'll have a little note on how to get the pre-order bonus stuff as well.
Perfect. Shane Snow, thank you so much for coming on, and I can't wait to read Dream Teams.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit bartdaltonconsulting.com or email contact@bartdaltonconsulting.com. Buy the book True Gravity on Amazon. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.